ladies and gentlemen, I don't think any of you here would be aware of.
The cameras caught moments they weren't meant to. Charles looking pale, his movements slower, his gestures smaller. And then there was Camilla. Once at his side in every moment of ceremony, her presence had been a signal of continuity, of partnership. But in recent months, she had grown quieter, more absent. Her seat at public functions sat empty more often. Her name slipped from press releases. Speculation surged. Was she unwell herself? Was she stepping back? Or was there something deeper, some fracture inside the palace that no one dared to acknowledge? Through it all, one figure remained consistent. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, as she has long been known, never courted glamour, never sought headlines. Instead, she built her legacy on loyalty, on hard work, on a relentless dedication to duty. While others faltered, she kept the calendar full. Engagement after engagement, ribbon after ribbon, handshake after handshake. The British public came to see her as the monarchy's backbone, the unsung royal who carried the quiet dignity of service without complaint. It was precisely this history, this life of steady, unquestionable devotion, that gave her words such power now. When Anne spoke, it was not as a politician, not as a figurehead chasing popularity. It was as the sister who had stood by, who had seen everything, who had never wavered, and in the vacuum left by Charles's silence, her voice carried a weight the nation could not ignore. The announcement came not from the palace press office, not from a carefully worded statement on royal letterhead, but from Princess Anne herself. Standing firm, her voice steady and deliberate, she delivered the words that would shake the monarchy to its core. King Charles was stepping back, immediately, not in months, not in a slow ceremonial transition, but at once. The choice to speak directly was itself a thunderclap. It was as a breach of the invisible code that governed palace life. Traditionally, every word must be filtered through courtiers, spun with careful phrasing, softened for public digestion. But Anne bypassed them all. It was a deliberate act of distrust, her way of telling the world that the truth could no longer be hidden behind polished press statements. The silence had stretched too far, the secrecy too thick. She broke it herself. The public reaction was swift and raw. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds swelled. Some wept openly, the grief of losing a monarch so soon mingling with the unease of not knowing why. Others shouted in anger, demanding answers. Why had this been concealed until now? Why had Charles's condition, his struggles, been shrouded in mystery? The suddenness of it all felt like betrayal. The monarchy, an institution built on continuity, had become fragile, unstable, even dishonest in the eyes of many. Adding to the unease was the absence of Queen Camilla. Once the ever-present partner at Charles's side, she had slipped from view weeks earlier. Official engagements cancelled. Portraits featuring her quietly removed from promotional materials. Whispers grew louder. Was she ill? Had she retreated voluntarily, or had she been forced aside? The lack of answers only deepened the storm, and with Anne now emerging as the lone voice of clarity, the tension between the sisters-in-law became impossible to ignore. Anne, blunt and unsparing, represented duty above all else. Camilla, now a ghost within the palace walls, became a symbol of mystery, absence, and perhaps division. The press seized on every angle, feeding a nation hungry for truth. Tabloids splashed headlines of abdication in all but name. Broadcasters cut from regular programming to live coverage outside the palace gates. Commentators invoked Diana's memory, pointing out the eerie echoes: secrecy, sudden feeble, the feeling of betrayal. For many, the ghost of Diana seemed to walk once more through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, haunting every decision, every silence. Buckingham Palace gates slammed shut just 1 minute ago. Not in the way we've seen for grand arrivals, not with the music of trumpets or the waving of flags, but with a heavy clang that seemed to echo through London's damp October air. Inside, black cars rolled quietly across the gravel courtyard, their tinted windows giving away nothing, only reflecting the flashes of cameras pressed desperately against the gates. Outside, whispers began to spread, sharp, hurried, uncertain. People leaned into one another, as if the truth might be hidden in the rustle of their neighbor's voice. The curtains of the palace, those same grand towering windows that have for centuries displayed the pageantry of monarchy, were drawn tightly shut. Not a glimpse of movement, not a flicker of light, as though the walls themselves were holding back a secret too great to tell. This was no ceremony. This was no celebration. This was crisis, sudden, suffocating, undeniable. And then, through the silence, through the tension, one figure emerged. Princess Anne, steady, unflinching, stepping forward. For the first time, she broke the silence. For more than 7 decades, Charles lived in the long shadow of destiny, waiting, preparing, enduring. The boy who grew into a man, the prince who grew into a symbol of patience. And then, at last, when the crown was placed upon his head, it seemed as though history had finally settled into its rightful course. A king, at last. A moment that many thought might never come. But now, suddenly, shockingly, it is gone. His reign, brief yet weighed with the hopes of generations, has ended not with the majesty of tradition, but with the quiet thunder of a king stepping down. A man who waited all his life for the crown has laid it aside after barely holding it, and the nation, the world, is left in disbelief. Citizens gather outside the palace in stunned silence, some in serene row, mourning the promise of stability that slipped away before it could take root. Others in anger, betrayed by the very figure who was meant to embody endurance. The press, restless and ravenous, spits headlines filled with the language of crisis and collapse. For many, the feeling is hauntingly familiar. They remember another time of secrecy, of whispered explanations, of silence from behind palace walls. The memory of Princess Diana's death still hangs like a shadow over every moment of sudden upheaval in the monarchy. Once again, curtains are drawn, lips are sealed, and the people are left to imagine the truth for themselves. It feels like betrayal, not just of trust, but of history repeating its darkest pages. And so the monarchy itself trembles. Its bond with the people has never been more fragile, stretched thin by years of scandal, tension, and shifting loyalties. Now, in this moment of collapse, one voice rises to fill the void, the voice of Princess Anne. Not polished, not rehearsed, but steady, sharp, and unflinching. In the silence of a king's sudden exit, her words matter more than ever. Charles's reign was never going to be easy. From the moment he took the throne, the weight of expectation pressed against him like stone. Here was a man who had waited longer than any heir in British history, stepping into the role at an age when most men retire. The crown was heavy not only with jewels, but with doubt. Every public appearance seemed to carry the question, could he endure? Could he truly lead? At first, the palace tried to project stability. Charles smiled, waved, shook hands. He spoke carefully, with the measured voice of a man determined to reassure. But behind the gilded doors, signs of strain began to surface. Cancelled appearances, sudden postponements, unexplained absences. The official reasons were vague. Logistical issues, rescheduling. But those who watched closely saw something more. A king growing frail before the public's eyes. Whispers of declining health rippled through the press. Leaks began to trickle out. Rumors of shouting matches behind closed doors, of Anne demanding honesty while others insisted on control. The media frenzy became a storm, each outlet competing to reveal more of the cracks within the royal family. Palace courtiers, once masters of tight-lipped silence, were suddenly losing their grip. The monarchy, long a fortress of tradition, was being exposed as fractured and divided. And at the center of it all stood Anne, unyielding, uncompromising, delivering a truth that was as painful as it was necessary. She had forced the world to confront what the palace had tried to hide, that the king was gone from the stage, and that the monarchy itself was trembling under the weight of secrecy and mistrust. It was in that moment, when Anne's words cut sharper than any official decree, that the story shifted from shock to open confrontation. She did not speak like a cautious royal, bound by protocol and polished lines. She spoke with fury, with the voice of someone who had watched the walls of silence rise too high, and finally decided to smash through them. Her defiance was unmistakable. She condemned the betrayal of trust, not in vague terms, but in a way that made clear she believed the people had been deceived. It was a break with centuries of royal restraint, and it electrified the air. Whispers soon followed that Anne held in her possession an earlier, unedited draft of Charles's speech, a version written in his own hand, unsmoothed by advisors, unsanitized by palace courtiers. If true, it meant that the official story, the words released to the press, were not the king's words at all, but the courtiers' spin on his retreat. The possibility was explosive. It fed the growing belief that Anne was not only speaking truth but actively protecting her brother's voice from manipulation. At the same time, rumors swirled of disputes over succession. With Charles stepping back so suddenly, the natural focus fell to William and Catherine. They appeared calm, poised, even steady, as though this storm had been expected. To some, their composure was reassuring, a sign of strength at a moment of chaos. But to others, it seemed too polished, too practiced. Were they truly ready to shoulder the burden, or were they quietly orchestrating events behind the curtain? In whispers across the press and among the crowds, suspicion grew. The sense deepened that this was not merely a king stepping aside. This was the crown itself cracking under pressure. The monarchy, an institution meant to embody continuity, was suddenly unstable, unpredictable. If Charles, after a lifetime of waiting, could not endure, what did that say of the throne's future? Anne's fury, the silence of Camilla, the unsettling calm of William and Catherine, all of it pointed to a deeper fracture, one that could not be repaired with simple ceremony. For the first time in generations, the crown itself seemed uncertain, its weight too heavy, its secrets too great to survive untouched. In the days that followed, Britain's streets became both sanctuaries of grief and stages of outrage. Outside Buckingham Palace, mourners lit candles and laid flowers, turning the iron gates into a shrine of sorrow. Yet just steps away, others raised placards, their voices sharp with anger, demanding answers, demanding honesty, demanding to know what had been hidden from them. Vigils and protests blurred together, grief and fury coiling into one restless tide. On social media, the storm was relentless. Images of Princess Diana filled timelines, her face side by side with headlines about Charles's retreat. Commentators and ordinary citizens alike invoked her legacy, drawing parallels between the secrecy of then and the secrecy of now. History repeats itself, some wrote. The palace never saw or learns. The ghost of Diana had been summoned once again, this time not by tragedy alone, but by silence and mistrust. The monarchy's bond with its people, already strained, cracked further. Distrust seeped into every conversation. For some, William and Catherine became the nation's hope, the poised pair who might steady the ship, young enough to rebuild trust, strong enough to lead. For others, their calmness was suspicious, even opportunistic. Were they stepping forward out of duty, or seizing a moment that had been crafted for them behind closed doors? The division was sharp, and it grew louder with each passing day. What once seemed eternal, the throne itself, suddenly felt fragile, mortal. Britain was not only mourning the exit of a king, it was questioning the very legitimacy of monarchy. And for the first time in living memory, its survival could no longer be taken for granted. Monarchy has never been a story of clean transitions. Power does not pass like a torch in the night. It falters, stumbles, and too often is smothered in silence. Again and again, history shows us how secrecy corrodes the very trust that keeps crown and country bound together. And now, in the wake of Charles's sudden retreat, that silence feels heavier than ever. Through it all, one figure has emerged as central. Princess Anne, the sister who has never sought glory, who has worked tirelessly in the shadows, now stands in the light. Some see her as the guardian of truth, the one voice willing to cut through the layers of polished lies. Others wonder if even she is bound by loyalty, destined to guard the monarchy's secrets, no matter the cost. The question lingers, sharp and unresolved. Will Anne reveal what truly happened, lifting the curtain at last, or will she protect the crown with the same silence that has so often betrayed the people's trust? For a moment, all of Britain waits in that uncertainty. The monarchy's future, its strength, Its very legitimacy may rest not on a king or a queen, but on one woman's choice. And until she speaks again, the crown itself hangs in suspense.